if it makes it to the COO, CEO, and or GC/CLO's desk, something's failed in the
Mhm.
relationship. The
Yeah.
old adage of we're screwing up if I have to pull up the franchise agreement and reference it.
Yeah. Man, you're just dropping bombs today, James. I love it. Welcome to Dear Frannie, the franchise advice column. I'm your host, Catherine LeBlanc. And along with my co host, James Vetrano, we've spent our careers inside growing franchise systems. From marketing to operations, we break down real questions and real challenges and share the kind of answers you only get from experience. Let's jump in. Thanks for joining Dear Frannie. I'm your host, Catherine.
I'm her co-host, James.
Hey, James.
Hey, Kevin.
Jumping right in, our this or that question today is going to be about menu standardization. So, when it
Yes.
comes to the menu, and that really means what you offer, it's not necessarily a food menu. Should franchisors require a standardized menu across all locations or allow variations based on local tastes and market demand? All right, James, tell me why you should vary based on local tastes and market demand.
Already given you my indication of which way I'm going, so you already have a head start.
That's right.
But when you counter this, it's wrong. It has to be, it has to be regionalized, right? I mean,
Okay.
we are in and around New Orleans, and regionalization is king, right? So there's the benefit of franchising. You have sort of the stuff you're known for as a brand, but then you enable a little local flavor, a little local taste, a little local options on to ingratiate yourself to the locals where your franchisee does business. And then two, to enable that franchisee to kind of help the system what other offerings there are. And to your point, I'm a F&B guy, but there's other franchises out there, enabling the franchise to meet the local market preference need or expectation, be it flavor profile, offering, fashion, whatever it is, really, in my opinion, one, ingratiates you to the market, two, helps your franchisee, and three, could ultimately lead to something for the system. And that's why I'm right.
I agree with everything that you said, but
Ugh.
I'm going to take the opposite because I'm thinking about this from the execution support level, right? Because we've all had a franchisee that says, okay, I want to customize my menu. My customers really want X, and I'm going to deliver it to them. Okay, well, great. And to your point, maybe you figure out something that's going to work in your concept, in your brand that can expand the brand. But now I need to train you on it, train other people on it. I need to incorporate it into the standards of the brand. And from a marketing perspective, you want assets. Don't tell me you're going to take care of it. You're going to bring your tacos to the menu and you're going to develop everything that is needed to support your tacos. What
Um,
happens is you need marketing support and you make my team stop whatever they're doing to support one location, which is not efficiencies at scale. Number two, you promote your tacos above what we're promoting on a national basis, and the national program doesn't work anymore. Number three, likelihood is that, yes, you may be the only location where tacos are a hit. We're going to grow and we're going to add more locations, which means that your neighbors are going to have to offer what you're offering, which means back to support, I need to develop all those materials to support it. My argument is that when you do allow regionalization, I get why it happens, but down the road, you are in a sticky situation where you can't support it. And that's why I'm right.
so first, quit picking on tacos. Second, 20% valid. That's all I can say. It's just agree to disagree on this or that
Agree to
today.
disagree. Look, I think we make both really good points. I think, look, and you said it earlier, we're in New Orleans. I worked for Smoothie King for a long time and worked there when we launched the King Cake Smoothie. I was in New Orleans in the office, pounding my fist on the table to not do this. So this has been a consistent standing of mine. And guess what? The King Cake Smoothie sells great. They've brought it back every year since, and it's not that big of a deal.
Well, and look, I will say regionalization can be beneficial to certain regions. It may not play in others, but there are system considerations and implications to that corporate robotic approach to pulling away the marketing team, but
Yeah.
still a disagree.
Yeah. Okay. I like
I
that.
won't.
I think it's a good one to agree to disagree on because you really could go either way.
I agree that it's a good one to disagree on. Okay. All right. Now I get to say Dear Frannie.
Yeah.
Okay. We're at that time, everybody's second favorite time. All right. The Dear Frannie question today. Early on, we let franchisees experiment a bit as we figured out what worked in different markets. Speaking of regionalization, now we're seeing inconsistency across locations. How do I know when experimentation has gone too far? How do I decide which brand standards to enforce without blowing up relationships? What say you?
Well, look, I've seen this time and time again. And what happens is that as a burgeoning franchise, and we've talked about it on this podcast before, your initial franchisees, they're joining you and they're figuring stuff out with you. You can't say that you figured it all out, right? Because you have your corporate locations and you just don't know what's going to work here, there, and everywhere. And so what happens is you do get some customization or some I'm doing this a little bit differently than you happening because you just don't have everything together just yet. When this becomes hard is when you have the next wave of franchisees coming on board and they're like, "Wait, we need the system. We need you to have everything written out and tell us what to do." And so then you go to write your system and it turns out the 5 locations that you have, everybody does it a little bit differently. So you need to bring it back into a system. And you can't do that all at once. And I think that's where part of this question is around what do you standardize first? And I think it's the right question because you're not going to be able to standardize everything all at once. And so what are the important things to start with? And I think for like from my perspective, and I'm really curious what I think we might be similar in that you start with the product. You got to standardize how you are producing the product to the end user because franchising is consistency. That's what you get when you franchise. And so if it's, how you bake your cakes, if it's how you greet the customer as they walk through the door, that process, those processes, I would say, is what you start with standardization. Where would you start?
I think if you're going to allow some regionalization and or deviation from whatever your core offering is in the franchising world, you're going to have some standards in place associated with that, right? So your franchise agreement typically will have a provision where if there's something you want to do, you send it in and the franchisor will approve it. And a system or process should be built around that. So I think the issue that our writer is facing is sort of due to maybe lackadaisical implementation of certain regionalization without creating a context or process around it. And that's hard
Mhm.
to catch up to. So, my advice would be if you're in that situation now, you got to dive immediately in to stem the issue, to build whatever needs to be built to either put a process and system in place or to
Mhm.
eliminate this chaos. If it's coming to you, don't roll something out, whether you have 3 locations that are franchised or 300, that you don't have at least some ability to ensure some systemized standardization process.
Mhm.
Otherwise, you're going to catch yourself behind the 8 ball. And the last thing I'd say is, typical the franchise agreements that I write have a set of things that the franchisor must do. And that list, and it's not exhaustive, but that list needs to be maintained constantly by your ops folks. And if the new menu or new offering request is made, part of that implementation and approval process should be the structure and system that we're going to hold the system and the franchisees accountable to. So if you got behind the 8 ball on this, my advice is dive in and try to fix it immediately or end it. And then learn from that so that you don't roll out these sort of regional things without some type of
Mhm.
structure behind it.
Yeah. And I think that's a good point. And what I'm hearing you say, you're almost saying create a process before you think you need it.
Word.
Because when things happen organically, and as they
Yep.
happen organically, that's where we kind of lose control over how many things have happened, right?
And look, I'll go to my experience with Ruby Tuesday when I was the head of international. Iceland had things on it that I had never heard of, right?
Mhm,
Romania, same thing. Significant regionalization, even in the MENA region, right? But
mhm,
there has to be some sort of process in place, either for those franchisees to be able to execute it correctly under the brand, and or for other franchisees that may want to pick and choose from things that are unique. Let's say a halal offering in Kuwait that we want to do in Romania. So, you know,
mhm.
if there are things that have gotten away from you in the system, take the time immediately to start addressing how we help that franchisee operate under the brand and the brand standards, as well
Mhm.
as create a system for other franchisees.
You know,
Good
the thing
question.
where I see this like really create a wrinkle and a lot of stress is in when you come to the point where you're ready to standardize your POS.
Okay.
And your POS from if you're a restaurant, if you're whatever your a POS is your point of sale system. So it's essentially the key piece of technology that you use to run your business. And my experience that I've had is that this key piece of technology in the beginning is rarely regulated. It rarely has standards attached to it. And so you get to a certain point where you're like, okay, well, now I can't, your reporting is junk because you've let your POS become data in, bad data in is bad data out. And you really have no understanding of, and because you don't have data, right? You don't have an understanding of what's selling well and what's not selling well. What should my strategy be now that I have enough, years behind me to really make some information or make some decisions with data. And so that's where I see when experimentation happens, and I agree with you because the best ideas come from the field. And so if you don't allow experimentation, you might be throttling some creativity that you don't want to because you don't need to have all of the best ideas in the world. But what happens is if that to James's point, if you don't have a process in place and you go to a point where you're ready to standardize, again, I've seen this at almost every brand that I've worked with. They start to quote unquote professionalize, which means that they get a point of sale system. Either not everybody was on the same, which is, don't do that. But or they've allowed such customizations. The roles in the POS have been so lax that they've allowed customizations. And so this one's figured out how to add these products. This one's figured out how to ring out this product this way. And it's a mess. I mean, that's the biggest part of where I see like you're
Yeah.
going to shoot yourself in the foot if you
Yeah.
don't get
Well,
your stuff under control
it
early.
again falls under the what's your process, and that POS is
Yeah.
one element, if not the key element of it. Factor in supply chain, factor in inventory systems, right? So I think, to your point about the point of sale pain point relative to this, and, just how point of sales become bloated relative to legacy items and whatnot. I agree. The POS becomes that mess
Yeah.
of garbage in, garbage out, or confusion and or lack of process and standardization for the operator and the system on an information basis. So good ad.
Well, so what do you think when we think about standards, right? And that's where, for me, I get passionate about the menu because I've seen the POS system just become a mess. And then I've seen marketing. I'm not going to ask you for any support on this. Oh, but can you please drop everything and support me on this? Those are the two like really big pain points that I get when we're not kind of enforcing standards. But there's some other places that standards exist. One is around what is that customer experience? How are they being greeted? How are they moving through your process? How are they being retained? Another one is around branding, right? How are you rolling out your standards around brand? Specifically, this comes up in social media for most brands because that's where everybody's posting all of the time. What are some other standards outside of kind of menu standardization that people don't think about that they should think about as far as standardizing?
Yeah, a couple off the top of my head. One, the ops manual needs to be the Bible associated with your operations, right? So that is the standardization that is expected in the execution of the offering in most franchise agreements that I've involved with, always refer to the ops manual. So, your
What's
ops
your James,
manual.
I wanna talk to you about the ops manual for a little bit because I've seen this go back and forth. One area, it's like, I've got it done, and then I don't touch it ever
Right.
again.
That's wrong.
Okay. And then the other piece is, I've worked with operators who are kind of banging the drum on like, we need to update ops manual. We need to update ops manual. Who typically tell me more about like why is there friction here? Cuz I mean, to your point, the ops manual is essentially everything that your franchisee is agreeing to that's
Right.
not in the lawyer written document that has to go, that's such a pain in the butt to make.
Right.
It should be the
Total,
easy like this is
total,
how we hold
total.
our franchisees accountable, right?
Yeah, total, separate podcast topic, right? The ops manual. It doesn't get focused on enough. And I think it's because it's sort of where a couple of worlds meet and nobody really owns it, right? So you've got, in the legal world, you want to cull out all the HR stuff relative to employment manual in the ops. It needs to be just how you run the actual business. So I don't know that there's anyone who internally owns that, right? Additionally, there needs to be this sort of quarterly, if not semi-annual, a minimum semi-annually review process where, I go back to the advice of capital R, little r, right? So you've got a review if done on a quarterly basis where the ops manual gets the little r Q1 2026 if it was just reviewed, and then it gets a capital R if there were any revisions to it, right? That document A needs to be living and breathing. B needs to be constantly updated. And C needs to be owned by operations and like corporate ops, franchise ops, and legal and franchise development. Those four groups need to talk and then roll it through the FAC every time there's an update. But it doesn't get enough attention. And I think it's just a book that ends up being put on a shelf. And
Mhm.
as things start flying and moving, especially in large systems, nobody's going back and codifying, if you will, what
Mhm.
needs to be done at present for the next couple of weeks, months,
Mhm.
or until next review. That's my 2 cents on it. What does the marketing side
Well,
think?
I love that. Well, and then from the marketing side, right, we get into compliance, right? That's when the ops manual really gets talked about is how are we holding our franchisees to the standards?
Right.
Well, we can hold them to what is in the ops manual and then the ops team is just so busy, they don't have time to update it. So I love what you just laid out and I hope everybody listened. Like make it make it easy to update by making sure you're updating it every quarter. If you're updating it or reviewing it every quarter, then those little updates are happening and you don't have to have a big project associated with updating the ops manual. I think that's super smart.
Thanks.
From a marketing side, the from the standards from the original question, the standards that you need to have in place are essentially your brand guidelines. And at the very basics, you need to have some rules around your logo. And I don't think that as internal brand people, we can get really sick of our marks and our campaigns and our creative because we see it every day. Your guest is not seeing it every day. And so what happens is the franchisee will take it and they get bored with it. So they start tweaking, they use this color instead of that color. I've seen so many times you take our logo and then you want to put, the college tiger in the logo
Yeah.
because you want it to
Or
be
or
relevant to your local market.
you put the Olympic rings, or you put
Yes.
Disney characters, like huge no-nos. So to your point,
Yes.
right, in the earlier question, right, ops manual,
Hmm.
trademark, trade dress,
Hmm.
FF&E,
Hmm.
and layout, right? So that to me is sort of like the four elements of standardization and focus
Yeah.
from a franchise standpoint, right? And your point, like, when I was at Einstein's, general counsel of Einstein's, we got a cease and desist letter from the US Olympic Committee, right? Because, one of our franchisees decided to make Olympic rings with the bagels, right? It's a big
Yeah.
no-no. So, to your point, and then that sort of builds into from a standardization process. If you have an LSM uh, system where or database where you got approved stuff, or people can just go in and drag it and use it, or you have a submission process associated with it. But the last thing I'd say on it is that's where your field ops team, when they're doing their franchise business meetings or they're going to the locations, they need to be looking around to
Hmm.
ensure that, you know, we have things in there that are, brand compliant. For instance, when I took over Fat Tuesday, I would go visit our franchise locations and there would be like plastic Mardi Gras faces, carnival
Mm,
faces
mhm.
on the wall, right? And beads and I guys, that's not part of our brand standards, right? The name
Right,
in and of itself is enough. We don't have to lean into the chinky side of Mardi Gras. So,
right.
the advice I'd say is marketing have a process, ops be
Mm,
on vigilant on your in-store inspections, and then create a database that's got a variety of approved things so that the franchisee doesn't have to go out and cut and paste or is told that's a big no-no.
yeah. Yeah, and that's where, the last part of that is enforcement, and I think
Yeah.
you just outlined really well, like, if it's in the ops manual, your ops team now has a guide that guides them in compliance in the field, and of course, you want your ops team to be consultative and making sure that they're helping the operations of the business and driving profitability with your franchisees, but they are also the front line, and so when something is out of compliance, it is their responsibility to bring it up and say, "Okay, well, we don't do that and why," right? So in your Fat Tuesdays example, it's like we don't lean into the cheap side of Mardi Gras because everybody else can do that. It's not differentiating and it makes us look cheap, I'm guessing. But
Yeah,
that's what I would say if
exactly.
that was the
Exactly
standard.
what I said. Yeah, right, right.
Yeah, and telling them the why, right? Like this is why we don't do it. We all agreed to this ops manual, so let's go ahead and enforcement. Have you ever seen a enforcement happen outside of the ops team?
Oh, yeah. I mean, most of as a lawyer becomes the legal side of things, right?
Mhm.
So
Yeah.
when you talk about franchise agreement, development agreement, or brand standard enforcement, that's when, it gets a little wonky. I mean, I think you're seeing it play out with larger brands right now. There's a lot of litigation going on associated with that. So, if it makes it to the COO, CEO, and or GC/CLO's desk, something's failed in the
Mhm.
relationship. The
Yeah.
old adage of we're screwing up if I have to pull up the franchise agreement and reference it. But sometimes it just has to be done. And the times I've seen it be non-confrontational or non-adversarial is when there's a legitimate business issue with either the franchisee location or the franchisee system. And the franchisor has to kind of come to the table on whether there's something that needs to be addressed. And look, I think McDonald's is going through it right now, you know, with the whole value
Mhm.
inspection of their franchisees. So I think that's you know, it's a constant issue that I think a franchisor has to be aware of and communicative with the franchisee. Franchise agreement or brand standard enforcement is an uncomfortable, difficult thing that needs to be mitigated by constant communication with the franchisee, constant alignment with franchise ops, and communication via the FAC and or executive
Mm.
team to the franchise owners.
Well, and I think you said it earlier, and I do think it gets missed before because lots of folks don't hire that in-house legal component until much further down the road. And what the biggest thing I think gets missed in this compliance process is a process. And
Yeah,
so someone does something wrong. The FBC is cheerleading and driving adoption and trying to drive profitability. And so they're like, I don't want to tell them they're doing something wrong. Then it gets to the leader of ops and it's like, okay, well, I have to come in and be the hammer. But
yeah,
then do we have a default process? Are we defaulting this person or is it
yeah,
just a warning? What is our warning process? And so without kind of understanding the steps, then nobody raised their hand
yeah.
on, like, this is wrong because there
See,
is no enforcement of it
to,
down
to
the line.
to our conversation about systems and structure, right? It's
Mhm.
really simple. In my mind, the franchise business consultant needs to have a quarterly business review, and any type of visit needs to be followed up with some sort of documentation in a standard form of the visit, right? And then that alleviates the FBC's uncomfortability. So when I come on as a franchisee, I know that my franchise business consultant is going to do X, Y, and Z, right? They're going to call me once a month or twice a month or three times a month. They're going to come visit once a quarter or twice a year. We're going to do a full out business analysis quarterly. And then I'm going to get an assessment, if you will, in a standard form from the FBC that says, here's what we talked about. Here's the good things. Here's the opportunities. Here are the issues I see relative to franchise compliance. And then that document gets conveyed to everybody in that operational circle. And then the next time, if it's not addressed, then we're having to sort of revisit it again. So at least there's a cadence associated with that interaction that alleviates the uncomfortability of the FBC, but sets the expectations for the system.
Yeah. Man, you're just dropping bombs today, James. I love it. I
Ooh,
have such
ooh,
easy
hey,
top 3 for me, and I'm gonna kick us off
let's
because
go.
number 1, if you guys are paying attention, James just outlined the what I would call, like, the gold standard in how to manage your ops manual. Quarterly reviews with then biannual kind of big R reviews. Number 2, James just outlined what a fantastic FBC kind of communication cadence and expectations should be, right? Set the expectations, whether it's monthly, quarterly, or some other type of visit schedule, but then also set the expectations of what's happening in each visit. I think that was brilliant. And then number 3, I'm going to say make sure that your logo, trade dress, trademarks are included in your brand standards so that you don't get sued later. Those are my top 3. What are yours?
I think one, your point about ensuring that there is a focus on brand standards out the gate, right? Like, don't franchise unless you know what your brand standards are. I think that's imperative. Secondly, I hate to give marketing any sort of credit, but it is a headache if ops or franchisees start going in a variety of different ways and then are looking for support, right? You're setting up your CMO and their team to fail right there and creating frustration. And then I think the third thing is look, it's about communicate and structure. So if there's an issue, then you need to look into it, communicate about it, and ensure if there's a process for it that's being followed. And if it's not, you're putting one in place.
I love it. This was a packed episode. Thank you for all the nuggets that you dropped. If our
Same.
discussion feels familiar, you're not behind, you're right on time. Thanks for joining us on Dear Frannie, and please share this with somebody who needs to know they are not alone.